Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, this is TopTenzNet, and in the video today we've got something very special for you. The video is called the Top 10 Ancient Warriors, and it's a collaboration between this channel, TopTenzNet, and the channel Metatron. And if you're into this sort of video, you should really check out Metatron's channel for more great stuff like this. He makes videos all about kind of ancient warriors, as well as a whole bunch of other things, and what's great about Metatron is he has a real true dedication to historical accuracy. So Metatron actually wrote the script for this video, this is his work, and you can check out more of his work by going over to his channel and subscribing. You can do that by clicking the link right there. Also a link in the description below. So let's get started with today's video, the top 10 ancient warriors. Number 10, Medieval Knight.
The first knights appeared during the reign of Charlemagne in the 8th century. By the 9th century, many knights and nobles held estates, fiefs granted by greater lords in return for military and other service. In some nations, the knight returned to foot combat in the 14th century, but the association of the knight with mounted combat armed with a spear and later a lance remained a strong one. Medieval knights or medieval mounted nobility also varied significantly depending on which part of the Middle Ages we are talking about. A Norman knight during the Battle of Hastings, a Knight Templar in the Holy Land, and a late medieval full-plate armoured knight would be very different in equipment. In Europe, plate armour reached its peak in the late 15th century and early 16th centuries with the development of full-plate armour. This divided into the Gothic Southern German style and the white Northern Italian armour style. An actual English style of armour was probably also present, being independent of the two main continental styles. The weapons of a knight were his lance, his polearms, his blunt weapons, and although considered a secondary weapon on the battlefield, his sword.
Number 9, Mongolian Archers.
Mongolian horse archers sprouted from tribes of nomads who derived their sustenance from herds of cattle, sheep and goats which they followed from one grazing ground onto the next. Different from the literal, meaning by the shore, permanent settlement society, Eurasia saw entire peoples living in temporary structures. These nomadic men lived most of their lives on horseback until their horses became virtual extensions of themselves. Their cavalry archer units were equipped with bows made of sinew on the back and a layer of horn on the inner surface with a frame of wood in the middle. These bows could pull well over 100 pounds, but they were short, so they could be used from horseback, allowing these troops to remain highly mobile.
Number 8, English Longbowmen.
After a march of 17 days from Harfleur, almost around the headwaters of the River Somme, the 28-year-old King Henry V of England set up his camp in the fields and orchards of Maisoncelles near Agincourt. The Battle of Agincourt is the most famous example of longbowmen put into action. In pitched battle, an encounter on a pre-arranged battleground, the danger posed by English longbowmen was well known. There are many different opinions on the draw weight of a medieval longbow. It's been estimated from 90 to 110 pounds force, although other sources suggest significantly higher draw weights in the 150 to 160 pounds force range. What is sure is that the English longbow is a very powerful weapon, and the archer was a professional soldier who needed to be trained specifically to develop the strength and ability necessary to use his weapon. The Englishman did not keep his left hand steady and draw his bow with his right. Instead, he kept his right at rest upon the nerve and pressed the whole weight of his body into the horns of his bow. Hence probably arose the phrase, bending the bow, and the French of drawing one.
Number 7, Genoese Crossbowmen.
The Balestrieri Genovesi were a famous military corps of the Republic of Genoa. They acted as mercenaries for both foreign powers and other Italian powers. The Genoese were famous not only because they were skilled professionals, but also because they were widely available in relatively large numbers. The high numbers of professional crossbowmen seems to have been a result of the city of Genoa's naval capacity. Galleys under Genoese law were legally required to have specific numbers of crossbowmen on board. Of course, the existence of such a law didn't guarantee that it was always followed to the letter, but there's no doubting that the use of the crossbow was linked to the city's naval and mercantile success. They carried large pavis shields, scudo pavesi in Italian. Operating a crossbow was easier than a longbow because they take less raw strength, but loading a medieval crossbow should still not be considered an easy task.
Number 6, Spartans.
Sparta was one of the dominant military city-states of ancient Greece. What made this city-state different from the others was its complete focus on extreme military training. Like other Greek city-states, the Spartans used phalanx warfare to engage the enemy in battle. However, the Spartan phalanx was considered to be among the best in battle because of this intense training system. Spartan warriors were certainly highly trained soldiers, but in the ancient world, Sparta was admired as much for its constitution, its system of education, its philosophical culture, its economic self-sufficiency, its diplomacy, and its music and dance as it was for its famous hoplites. Ancient Sparta was far more complex and multifaceted. Plutarch claimed that devotion to the intellect is more characteristic of Sparta than love of physical exercise, while they've also been categorized as warrior philosophers.
Number 5. Immortals.
The Immortals were an army of 10,000 heavy infantry who were both the Imperial Guard and the standing army during the expansion of the Persian Empire and the Greco-Persian Wars. They were the elite force of the First Persian Empire. Being chosen to become an Immortal was a great honor. Herodotus gave the name Immortals to them, and we owe most of the historical knowledge we have about these elite warriors to his writings. The name Immortal was given to them because when a member of the 10,000-strong force was killed or wounded, someone else immediately replaced him. Thus, from an outsider's perspective, it would appear that each member of the infantry was immortal, and their replacement may have represented a resurrection of sorts. They were sophisticated, well-equipped, their armor glittering with gold. As described by Herodotus, their armament included wicker shields, short spears, swords or large daggers, and bows and arrows. They also wore a special headdress, believed to have been a Persian tiara.
Number 4. Maori Warriors.
The bravery and savageness of Maori warriors was legendary. The Maori fighting unit was called a hapu. A hapu rarely consisted of more than a few hundred warriors, often numbering less than 100. Most of the warriors were men, but women were also known to fight. Often several hapu joined forces in battle. A chief usually led the warriors. Maori warriors usually attacked at dawn. They were experts in the art of ambush and surprise raids. They could appear and disappear swiftly and noiselessly into the thick New Zealand natural rainforest environment.
Number 3. Vikings.
The Vikings were Norse navigators, seafarers, and seaborne raiders. Norse military, mercantilism, and demographic expansion constituted an important element in early medieval history. Current popular representations of the Vikings are typically based on cultural cliches and stereotypes, but the original Vikings were not professional privateers or full-time soldiers, or at least not at first. Originally, they were full-time fishermen and farmers who spent much of the year at home. Only in the summer would they have rallied to the call of a local leader and ventured across the sea to raid, trade, or seek out new lands to settle. It's very important to note that the word Viking does not refer to a race per se. It refers to those Norse people who would go on a Viking, meaning an expedition overseas. The typical equipment of a Viking would consist of a spear, their most common weapon, a shield, an axe, and a sword, and their most typical armor would be mail armor.
Number 2. Samurai.
Samurai were the elite warriors of feudal Japan, associated with the middle and upper echelons of the warrior class called bushi. Differently from popular belief, although they were trained in sword combat, their weapons of choice on the battlefield were the bow, yumi, and the spear, yari. After trading with the Portuguese, they also used matchlock-type arquebus, tanigashima teppo. An arquebus was an early firearm. Samurai were originally mounted warriors who, years later, would also be deployed as foot soldiers. In the 7th century, the Japanese wore a form of lamellar armor, which would eventually evolve into the samurai armor called yoroi. Yoroi were rather heavy to wear because of the fact that they were mostly hung from the shoulders, but in the 1500s, with the advent of firearms, a new type of samurai armor called tosegusoku was created. It was lighter and tapered at the waist, which allowed for quicker action in combat. As far as the Heian period is concerned, those who would fight on the battleground were called samurai. In other words, there was always a high demand for strong and proficient warriors regardless of their social status or role on the battlefield. During that period, anyone could become a samurai.
Number 1. Roman Legionary.
The figure of the Roman soldier or legionarius wearing his lorica segmentata is one of the most iconic symbols of ancient warfare. Their equipment and role vary depending on the era, for instance as a republican soldier or an imperial soldier. A late imperial soldier's weapons and armors would have varied significantly from the early klipeus, a Greek-like shield, and hasta, spear, to the famous scutum and gladius. Their discipline and ability to fight effectively in tight formation are legendary. Particularly the post-Marian Reform professional heavy infantrymen were highly trained soldiers. They could march, fight, build, and scout enemy territory. They enlisted in a legion for 25 years of service and had to be Roman citizens to be able to do so.
So I really hope you enjoyed that video. Over there on the right are a couple of other of Metatron's videos which are definitely worth checking out, so just click on any of those to go over to Metatron's channel, and thank you for watching.